All right, guys, today we're going to look at classification and biodiversity. So, evolution pretty much offers an explanation for all these different organisms that we have here today. Evolution is the explanation for diversity in the world, right? In the past, similarities in appearance were usually used to group organisms. So when we didn't have all this fancy equipment, we literally just looked and we're like, okay, we're gonna group them based on what we see, right? But now with all this technology that we have, we can group organisms based on DNA, RNA, or evidence from protein. So the first classification system was set up by this guy. His name is Carolus Linnaeus. We just usually go by his last name. He developed a system over 200 years ago, and he was a botanist. So the scientific technology is continually improving. This allows us to see more detailed differences between organisms. So over time, Linnaeus' system got expanded, right? So originally we're like, okay, if it's not a plant, it's an animal. But after that, we discovered it's way more complicated than that. Not only were there things that were plants and animals, but there were things that couldn't be classified as either. Things like fungi, things like protists, things like bacteria. And then today, we're now up to we divided bacteria into two, right? So we divided bacteria into eubacteria and archaeobacteria. We still have our protists, we still have our fungi, we still have our plants and our animals. So we are up to a kingdoms, six kingdom classification system. So again, this is what it was. You've got everything. The kingdom is the broadest category, it's the most general category. Then the phylum, then the class, the order, the family, the genus, and the species. So the genus and species are the most specific, all right, particularly the species. So specificity decreases as you go down the classification system, right? And we'll talk about domain a little bit later. So each category continued to be divided into smaller and smaller groups until only one type of organism existed, and that is where we get the species identification, right? And this list is just the same thing as that table, so you don't have to write it twice if you drew the diagram, right? But if you didn't draw the diagram, make sure you write it now. All right, so to be the same species, the organisms had to be able to, one, reproduce, and two, have offspring that can have offspring, right? So similar organisms may be the same genus, but not the same species. And sometimes if they're the same genus, they can reproduce and create new offspring. This would probably be under artificial conditions. They're not going to naturally gravitate towards each other. So, two examples that I have here are the horse and donkey can breed together to make a mule, but two mules cannot make a new offspring. And so the mule is not considered to be a species of its own. Same thing with the lion and the tiger. They can mate under specific conditions. They can create a liger, but two ligers can't mate to create an offspring. And so ligers and mules cannot become their own species. So the current classification system, we've added a new level, and that is the domain. So the domain is larger than the kingdom, right? So initially the kingdom was the largest classification. Now we've added domain, right? So this is based on new research that all living things exist. Based on new research, all living things exist in the six kingdoms were placed into one of the three domains. And those domains are bacteria, which consists of bacteria, archaea, which is the older bacteria, and eukarya, which consists of everything else from the six kingdoms, the protists, the fungi, the plants, the animals. So this is what that looks like. So domain includes all of the other what I just said. Bacteria includes all of the true bacteria. Archaeobacteria includes the old bacteria. And then, I guess you don't have to write it twice. I just like this picture. And then eukarya consists of protists, fungi, plants, and animals. So nomenclature, according to binomial nomenclature, which is Linnaeus' system, each organism should be given a two-word name called a scientific name. The name is used for a species regardless of the language that that person speaks or the region that they live in. Most names are in Latin. So like there are a lot of things that we call by different names. For example, if I were to show you a Jamaican apple, and it would be very different from an American apple, right? And yeah, so there are rules for writing the scientific names. The first word of each name is the organism's genus, right? So for example, for humans, Homo would be the genus. The first letter of this name should always be capitalized. The second word is the species identifier. For example, in humans, sapiens, and that name is written with a common letter. So, yeah. So, Homo sapiens, as we are. Classification key is also known as a dichotomous key, and it's useful in identifying unknown organisms, but is not limited. It's not. You could use it to identify living things as well. So use a dichotomous key to identify the organisms by their scientific name. You can also use it to identify other characteristics about the organism, and you'll see what I mean in a second here. All right, so I'm gonna do the first one with you. So basically, you look at your picture, you look at your organism, right? And you start with the first thing in the dichotomous key. So an organism with 2 or 4 functional legs, is that true? Yes, that is. So we're gonna go to 2, we're gonna follow the directions. Organism without wings, it's a bird, so it does have wings, so that's not true, so we're gonna read the second option, right? And that gets us to a name. So this organism would be identified as Passer domesticus. Okay. All right. So let's try it on organism B, and then I'm going to leave you to do C and D on your own. So organism with 2 or 4 functional legs, I see no legs. Organism without legs, so go to 3. Organism is unicellular, I doubt that is. Organism is multicellular, go to 5. Organism is heterotrophic, that's true, I'm gonna go to 6. Organism lives in the ocean, I don't think so. Organism lives on land, so I'm gonna go with Ophiophagus hannah for organism B. All right, I want you guys to practice and do C and D on your own. I'm going to be checking for those correctly identified in your notes. Okay? So ways to show evolutionary relationships. So phylogeny is classifying organisms based on their evolutionary relationships. We use a cladogram or a phylogenetic tree. This is a diagram that kind of looks like a family tree. So it's the evolutionary tree, the way the pedigree is the genetic tree, right? So each of these creatures has an evolutionary relationship to one another, and they all share a common origin. Excuse me. And their current forms are all derived from branching events somewhere in their phylogenetic past. So this is what a phylogenetic tree looks like. The common ancestor would be down here, And you could look at this and determine relatedness. You could determine what is the most primitive, so the least evolved, and you could also determine what is the most evolved. All right, so in this case, the ray-finned fish would be the least evolved because it was the first thing that broke away from the common ancestor. And mammals would be the most evolved because it is furthest on the tree. So think of it this way, the evolutionary tree, it's like climbing a literal tree. The first branch that you get to, that is the most primitive. The next branch that you get to is the next. And so you find that just like a real tree, you're gonna find the youngest leaves at the top. And it's the same thing with a phylogenetic tree. The most evolved organisms are going to be at the top of that tree. So should be able to read a phylogenetic tree or a cladogram. So which organism is the most primitive? I'm not going to tell you. I'm going to check for your answers. Which features are shared by the salamander and mouse? So here's a salamander, here's a mouse. What features do they have in common? All right. And I'm gonna help you with that one. It's gonna be lungs and jaws. All right, because the mouse has claws or nails, but the salamander doesn't. Right? The mouse has fur and mammary gland, but the salamander doesn't. All right? So I did 2 for you. And then I want you to read 3, read 4, and answer them, and we'll work these together in class to make sure that everyone understands it. So here is another practice. All right, based upon this cladogram, what is a common ancestor of all animals? Pay attention. All right, which group of animals is the most primitive? So the simplest. All right, which is the most complex? And which group of animals is more closely related to mollusks? Echinoderms or roundworms. So here's mollusks, here's echinoderms, and here are the roundworms over here. So which one is most closely related? Circle one. We'll go over this in class to make sure that we are good. All right, guys, that's that.